Every morning, before the sun rose and the world remembered itself, Alara walked the same path with her 5 dogs. No one asked why she walked so early, or why shadows seemed to cling to her heels. They should have. Because the thing Alara walked to feed was waking, and someone had just started following her. Every morning, like clockwork, before the sun could chase the last stars from the sky, a girl named Alara walked through the sleepy town of Grenton with her 2 dogs, a golden retriever named Soul, and a silent, shadowy Doberman named Nyx, her figure a familiar silhouette drifting through the dawn mist, always wrapped in the same pale blue coat no matter the season, always with headphones in, head bowed just enough to seem polite but not inviting. Everyone knew her, or thought they did, this quiet young woman with eyes that never lingered, whose soft nods and quick strides suggested a kind of shyness more than anything. But no one ever asked where she came from or why she was always out so early, and no one ever questioned the dogs. How Soul was so open and friendly, while Nyx would fix his black eyes on people like he was memorizing their heartbeat. And while most townsfolk considered her a benign oddity, one of those people you wave at without really knowing, their curiosity never quite outweighed their comfort with routine. And so Alara remained an unsolved riddle in the center of a town that didn't care to ask questions. But when a boy named Evan, new to town and fascinated by her ritualistic behavior, decided to follow her one morning under the excuse of a jog, the chain of silence that protected Alara's mystery began to break, and things began to unravel in ways no one could have foreseen. Because Alara didn't take the normal route that day. Instead, she cut through the old woods behind the abandoned Thornley estate, a place local kids swore was cursed and where animals were said to vanish, a patch of forest so dense and still that even the wind seemed reluctant to pass through. And Evan, trailing quietly, saw her stop in front of a half-collapsed gate, whisper something under her breath, and the gate, rusted and unmoving for decades, groaned open though no one touched it. Nyx went in first, tail stiff, body low, as though entering sacred ground, and Soul paused too. Look at Evan's hiding spot for a second too long before following. Evan hesitated, heart pounding, logic screaming that he should turn back, but his curiosity, that ancient flame that burns in every story that ends in horror, pushed him forward, and he crept after them, the trees swallowing the town behind him like a curtain of silence. And as he moved through the ruinous garden, overgrown with black roses and vines that seemed to twitch at the edges of his vision, petals falling like ash, he saw Alara kneel by a stone well, its surface cracked and crusted with lichen, and begin to feed something down inside it. Not food, but strips of cloth and bundles wrapped in twine, muttering words he couldn't catch, syllables that seemed to slither through the air rather than travel by sound. And when she stood, the air shimmered as though heat radiated from the earth itself, and a figure rose from the well. Impossibly tall and impossibly wrong, made of shadow and bone and something ancient and waiting, its face a shifting mass of eyes that blinked in chaotic rhythms, each one trained on a different direction. Evan gasped and stepped back, cracking a twig underfoot, and the thing turned, all of its eyes focusing on him in unison, like a hive mind learning to see through a single lens, and Alara only sighed and said, "I told you not to come here." Her voice devoid of emotion, as if burdened by inevitability, before snapping her fingers, and the world spun out from under him, cold and dark and filled with 1,000 whispering voices, like memories bleeding backward through time, until he awoke hours later in his bed. The sun overhead, and no memory of how he got back, only the smell of wet leaves in his nostrils and the bruises on his ankles, like he'd been dragged by something that didn't quite have hands. And that's when the town began to change. Dogs went missing, shadows stayed. Longer than they should, stretching like ink across cobblestones even at noon, and people swore they heard something breathing at the edge of the woods, a deep inhaling sound that came from nowhere and everywhere. And Alara still walked each morning, but now Nyx growled at everyone. Even people he used to ignore, and Soul no longer wagged his tail, only stared ahead like a soldier on patrol, and though no one said it out loud, everyone began to watch her more closely, sensing the unease, the wrongness that clung to her like mist. Doors were locked earlier, curtains drawn tighter, and a general heaviness settled over Grinton like a blanket soaked in dread. Then one night, the old man who ran the antique shop vanished, his front door torn from the hinges, every mirror in the shop shattered from within, and a spiral etched into the wall in something too thick to be paint. Evan, finally trusting the fractured memories that crept back in dreams, decided to confront Alara, not knowing that she had been marked since birth, bound to keep something imprisoned that was never meant to be touched. The wind howled through the broken teeth of the Thornley estate as Alara and Evan descended into the belly of the earth, where roots writhed like nerves and stone wept from old wounds. The passage down into the well no longer a straight drop, but a winding spiral staircase of bone and memory carved by something older than language, older than light, a place that throbbed with the pulse of the hallowed one, the air thick with the scent of iron and salt and ash, as if time itself had bled here for centuries. Sol and Nyx led the way, their paws silent but purposeful, fur bristling, eyes bright with an unnatural clarity, as though they remembered this place from before they were born. And Evan, heart hammering and mind screaming to run, stayed close behind Alara, who moved like a shadow caught between resolve and exhaustion, her hands trembling, her lips moving in silent prayers that left trails of steam in the cold, dense air. She had told them before they entered that the well was not just a prison, but a wound in the world, and the hollowed one was its infection, feeding not on flesh, but on meaning, on the things people forget, on grief, loss, and names whispered in sorrow. She explained that for generations, her family had given pieces of themselves to keep it quiet. Memories of their own faces, the sound of loved ones' laughter, the color of their eyes. And now she was nearly empty, a vessel holding the bare minimum of self, and what remained was cracking. But Evan, still full of questions and anger and guilt, couldn't imagine giving up that much of himself, couldn't imagine walking through the world with no history, no tether to joy. And yet, as they moved deeper, he understood that this wasn't about choice anymore. It was about sacrifice. And soon, the stairs ended at a platform that hung over a chasm too vast to see across, a void lit only by the shifting glow of the entity itself, which pulsed like a heartbeat in the dark, 1,000 eyes opening and closing like flowers blooming in reverse. And a voice that was not a voice echoed up to greet them, not in syllables, but in truths, in feelings so sharp they tore at the soul. Betrayal, hunger, sorrow, eternity, the taste of the end. Alara collapsed to her knees, her breath hitching, her hands outstretched not in surrender, but in offering. And the dogs flanked her, Nyx baring his teeth while Sol whimpered low and mournful, and Evan stood frozen, tears streaming down his face as he felt every regret he'd ever carried rise to the surface. Every moment he'd let someone down, every word he hadn't said to his father before the man disappeared without a trace 5 years ago. A disappearance he'd never connected to this town, to this thing, until now, because he understood suddenly that the hollowed one didn't just feed on forgotten things. It caused them. It devoured them. And his father, his dad, had been claimed, erased from history, swallowed by the entity in some long-forgotten ritual, maybe even by Alara's mother, maybe even by Alara herself. And that realization struck him like a blade, staggering him back, nearly sending him tumbling into the void. But Alara caught his wrist, her fingers burning cold, and said through clenched teeth, "I'm sorry. I didn't know it would choose him." And that broke him, not the apology, but the grief in her eyes, the burden she carried alone for so long, a young girl shaped by generations of silence, asked to pay debts she never accrued, forced to forget her favorite stories, her sister's face, the feeling of music just to keep this thing asleep. And Evan, weeping now, not from fear but from love, from pain, from the aching vastness of what Alara had endured, took her hand and said, "You're not alone anymore. I'll help you whatever it takes." And the hollowed one laughed, not with sound, but with a pressure that rattled teeth and bones, as if amused by their defiance, as if entertained by their unity, and it offered them a choice. It would retreat again, go dormant if they gave it something precious. Elara knew what it wanted. Her final memory, the last piece of herself she had kept hidden, the face of the sister she once loved. The last time she laughed, the final warmth before her life became duty. And Evan knew what it wanted from him, too. The truth of his father's voice, the memory of sitting on his shoulders at the beach, the way his mother smiled before grief stole her away. It wasn't just about pain, it was about connection, and giving it up meant becoming empty, becoming less. And yet they both nodded, not because they wanted to forget, but because they wanted others to remember. They wanted the town to be safe, for the children to grow up without whispering shadows for no one else, to lose their name to the dark. Alara closed her eyes, tears falling freely now, and whispered her sister's name over and over until the sound unraveled into nonsense. And with every repetition, her expression became softer, sadder, until finally she looked at Evan and said, "Who was I again?" And Evan held her face, trembling, and whispered back his father's favorite joke, the one about the talking crab and the broken watch. And as the memory left him, his knees gave out and he collapsed beside her, gasping like a drowning man, eyes wide and empty, and the hollowed one, pleased, retreated into itself, the eyes folding in, the void dimming, the pulse slowing until the chasm was silent once more and the platform cracked, splitting in two, but not before Nyx and Soul leapt to their sides, dragging them by sleeve and collar up a hidden passageway that opened in the garden of the Thornley estate. The same black roses now blooming red as blood, the vines curling away as if in thanks, and dawn broke above them, real and warm and quiet for the first time in what felt like 1,000 years. And Grinton began to heal, slowly, subtly. The missing remained gone, but no more vanished. The woods grew less dense, the birds sang again, and the shadows returned to their proper lengths. Alara, changed beyond recognition, walked no more, not because she was gone, but because she no longer remembered why she had walked. She lived with a kind older couple who said she reminded them of a daughter they lost, and she gardened now, smiling at strangers with a gentleness that came from living without weight. And Evan, older now, quieter, walked the morning path alone, Soul and Nyx always at his side, though even they seemed grayer, slower, as if they too had given something in that pit. And he never looked toward the woods, not anymore. But he carried a notebook filled with words he didn't remember writing, sketches of a girl in a blue coat, a golden retriever, a black dog, a spiral, a well. And sometimes he'd stop at the edge of town at the stone fence where the mist always lingered and feel tears in his eyes for no reason, a sorrow he couldn't name. But he'd keep walking, every step a quiet him, a thank you, a goodbye, a promise. And though the hollowed one slept, Evan knew it was not gone. Such things never die. They're only forgotten, and in the forgetting, they grow hungry again. But maybe, just maybe, the love and pain left behind in that chasm would buy the world another century of peace. And in the end, as the last leaf fell from the trees that autumn, and Evan stood watching the morning sun rise with the dogs at his side, he felt her presence. Not her memory, but her essence, like the warmth of a hand once held. And for the first time in years, he smiled. Not because he remembered, but because something inside him knew that even if names fade, even if the world forgets, love does not, and sometimes that is enough.